Okay, so now we're back to David Chu's China Bistro website again, and now that we're armed with JavaScript, we could do some really neat things with it. Number one is, let's go ahead and fix the issue that we left over for the JavaScript part that we couldn't fix before. And the issue was this: if we squeeze the browser and turn it when the button over here comes up, that the menu is a collapsed menu, and if I click on that, the menu comes up, but if I click anywhere here, I really expect that the menu should collapse by itself, but it doesn't. So what we need to do is we need to attach an event handler to this button that after we click it, the second the button loses focus, which means I will click right here somewhere. So in other words, in the JavaScript event handler speak, it's the blur on blur. On blur means that the particular element loses focus. Okay, so how do we achieve that? So first of all, we need to figure out when to do this, right? We obviously don't want to do anything similar to this on blur when we dealing with these big buttons. We only want to do this when it becomes this collapsible button. So if we actually turn on the Google Chrome developer tools, we'll be able to tell what the size is, and it's very clear that the button comes up around the 760, 68, 60, something like that, and that's a breakpoint obviously that we had and we've established before. So let's go back to our code editor, and right now I'm located in lecture 59 in the after folder. That's where I'm going to be working from, and the before folders again is a copy of the after folder the last time we left over the David Chu's website. In the state that we left it over, that's where this before folder is, the contents of the before folder are in. So what we need to do is we need to go to our script.js file, and I have some code here that I prepared for this particular lecture that we'll go over right now. Okay, so the first thing is we need to do something on blur. Well, I'm going to talk about this in just a second, but before we do, we really want this functionality to start when the DOM content is loaded. Well, the thing is that we would love to do just straightforward JavaScript, but we can't because we need to use the jQuery library, because the collapse menu was what we're trying to do here, is a plugin that is hosted in bootstrap.js, bootstrap mean.js, and it's based on, and it's dependent on jQuery. So can't really avoid this jQuery library, at least for this particular piece. And even though this course doesn't really include jQuery library, you're certainly now equipped enough with JavaScript to understand what's going on. So let me go over in some detail as to what's going on here. The jQuery function name is actually $. That is exactly right. The name of the jQuery function is $. So what is happening here is there's a $, and then something is being executed, as you could see. The opening parens and the closing parens. So we're executing a $sign function against that. Well, what that does in jQuery, $sign function, is it's the same thing as the document.addEvent listener DOM content loaded, which means anything inside of this function that we provide in here, that's what that $sign function expects in this type of scenario, that if you put a function inside of it, what's going to happen is it's going to get loaded, or this function is going to get executed when HTML has been processed, but before all the images and extra resources have been loaded. So this is exactly basically the DOM content loaded event. So this is when this code is going to get executed. It's really as simple as that. So now let's take a look as to what's going on here. Yet again, we're reusing this $sign function. Well, the jQuery $sign function also has another functionality in that it serves as a query selector. So if we put something in quotes inside of the parens after the $sign, that becomes, or that serves as a selector. So really, this statement right here is no different than this statement right here that I wrote in the comments, which is document.querySelector, then # navbar toggle. So what we're doing is we're selecting an element with an ID navbar toggle. And if we go and look at our HTML, let's go and copy that and look at our index.html and let's search for that. So this is our button right here, the navbar toggle, right? That's the button. So if that button loses focus, and as I told you, that means on blur, and on blur just means .blur, which is exactly pretty much the same as we would do here. Once we would select it in regular JavaScript, we would say add event listener and blur is the event. So this is what basically we're doing here. We're saying that blur, when that happens, I want you to execute this function right here. And this function just says the following. I want to first grab the screen width, and as you see, we're doing window.inner width, which means it's the width of the browser window itself, not the entire screen of the monitor. And then if the screen width is less than 768, so we're basically checking if we're within that breakpoint where the collapsible button shows up. If that's true, right, and that button lost focus, what we want to do is we want to again select collapsible nav. Collapsible nav is that menu, and we could take a look at it right now. If we go to index.html and search for collapsible nav, and there it is. So this is the collapsible nav. So you can see this all our menu items right here. So point is, if we select that and we'll apply this function called collapse with the value of hide. Now this collapse function, and if you copy and we'll go to Bootstrap and we'll search for it in here, there's the collapse.js. So this whole thing is coming from inside Bootstrap, but it is a plugin to jQuery. So we can't really avoid jQuery, unfortunately, at least for this course. Or fortunately, I guess, you now learned a little bit something new. Okay, so now that we've collapsed it, we're good to go. And if we save that right now and go back to our browser, and now if we squeeze the browser to have the button show up, if we click on the button, the menu shows up, but if I click anywhere else, the blur event will fire and this whole menu should collapse. If I click, the menu collapses. Great. So now we're done with that little nugget and we're ready to move on to make the main part of our web page become much more dynamic.